And so what we're saying about Trump is we're sort of saddened that he didn't manage to untangle even more than 2 or 3 strands of the Gordian knot. And so, the sort of the temptation of that line of thinking is to say, okay, whenever we get, the chance to, perform this amazing fucked up opportunity again, we're going to get a guy who can untangle 10 or 15 or even 20 strands of the Gordian knot. And the thing is, you shouldn't be messing with the Gordian knot at all. You should basically, you should be executing executive power from day one in a totally emergency fashion. You don't want to take control of these agencies through appointments. You want to defund them. You want them to cease to exist. And that's a totally different set of strategies. The only thing that, it's like
you're essentially advocating for someone to, age-old move, right? Which is gain power lawfully through an election, through legal means, and then exercise it unlawfully. And what do you think the actual chances of that happening are?
It wouldn't be unlawful. It would be you'd declare a state of emergency in your inaugural address. Unlike FDR, you'd actually have a mandate to do this. FDR would,
where would that mandate come from?
It would come from basically running, saying, "Hey, this is what we're going to do." And FDR didn't do that. FDR ran as a conservative Democrat. He's like, "We're going to eradicate government waste." Right? You can read the 1932 Democratic platform, and it has nothing to do with the New Deal. Nothing. Zero, zilch. It's a classic bourbon Democrat platform. And so, FDR actually does this, but he does this in this kind of sneaky way. And then he goes in his first inaugural, which is really worth the read. And he basically says that, toward the end of the speech, look, Congress, you have 2 choices. Either grant me absolute power, I'm going to take it anyway, because this is a national emergency and it demands national unity. And, and he uses all these military metaphors in doing so. He really goes full Caesar. And it's a very 1933 speech. And so he essentially, his way of taking power is to request that power from the people who Americans believe have the right to grant it. Okay, FDR kind of half asks and half takes. It's kind of alpha. It's whatever. I wouldn't do that. I don't think now is really the time for it. But if you basically say, look, one of the geniuses of the American Constitution is its numerous ambiguities. Its ambiguities are in a way poetic ambiguities. And one of the things is that the Constitution is so ambiguous that it basically, it's currently ended up in the state of legislative dictatorship, where basically, really deep state is the legislative branch. It responds to Congress.
I was going to say, it's not the actual legislative, which does not exercise its enumerated power.
Yeah, this is one of, Burnham's things between, the real meeting and the official meeting, right? And so it's wound up in this weird state of legislative supremacy. And, but it doesn't note your legislative and judicial supremacy. Nothing in the Constitution.
But just to clarify, it's really rule-making supremacy as a substitute for legislative supremacy. So it's the rule-making bodies within the
legislative,
agencies.
Exactly. The legislative bodies, take that authority, secure it from democracy by having, elections with these incredible incumbency rates and parliamentary procedure with incredible seniority. They sort of create this thing that's nominally reelected every 2 years. Of course, the founders thought that the House of Representatives would be a hotbed of populism, right? And instead, it's a hotbed of, gerontocracy. And that gerontocracy.
Although within living memory, it had been, you could think of it as the 1994 election was a populist revolt, and
it was a populist revolt that went absolutely nowhere. And just ran into this, there are interesting precedents in the contract with America, model, which let me get into it in a minute before we run out of time. But those precedents are, that was certainly not a success, and that was not, and so you have this system of rule where one branch is actually another. The Congress Constitution is not in correct working order when the executive branch is run by the legislative branch. Okay, what you're doing here is you're basically making the Constitution work like it says. And what the Constitution says is that the chief executive is in charge of the executive branch. It doesn't mention anything about micromanaging his funding, or doesn't even mention anything about what happens if there's a conflict between the executive branch and the judicial branch. And as you know, your friend Lincoln had some issues there. And ex parte merriment, right? He was just Lincoln. FDR was not a sort of 20th century dictator in the same sense that Lincoln was. I mean, I don't know if you read that wonderful Lincoln order closing the New York newspaper. But yeah, he did all the stuff, right? And but he was, like Caesar, he was a gentleman. In person, not if not in war. And so, these things are fully part of the American tradition. The American tradition could the literal words of the Constitution could mean a country governed by the Congress. It could mean a country governed by the White House. It could mean a government run by the Supreme Court.
Okay,
and you could see the Supreme Court as like a handful
I disagree
of 9.
With that. I think the wording is pretty clear, and we're not following it. But leaving that disagreement aside, disagreement aside, the issue here that I think we've now confront is a person trying to do this. We can also leave to one side whether it would actually be lawful or not, constitutional or not, and I'm sure people on the more purist side of constitutional interpretation would say no. But leave that aside. A president or some leader, whoever it is, trying to get away with this will get away with it or not, to the extent that the media and the dominant culture, as you started this conversation almost with, the real power centers in what is a theocratic regime are Harvard and the New York Times. And if you remember, if the person is trying to use these powers in a way that Harvard and the New York Times disapproves of, they will put all their effort into making sure that he can't do it. And how does that overcome that?
That's right. That's why basically you can't, continue to have a Harvard or the New York Times pass since, perhaps the start of April. So you're essentially, the point is that if you remember the mindset of 2016 after Trump won the election, there was an enormous terror in the entire oligarchy. You remember this terror.
Yeah.
And this terror lasted in this performative way really until now. Hopefully there's still elements of it there. It's the classic fear by the aristocracy of the peasants. And what the aristocracy realized at that time was that if Trump simply didn't stop his panzers, if he just kept rolling, he could take everything. And it's like, it was like the Confederacy after the Battle of Bull Run, where if they just kept marching, they're in Washington in 12 hours, and if they keep marching after that, they're in Boston in 2 weeks, right? But the Confederacy never had any idea of taking Boston, and really at the time their goal was not to take Washington, but to bloody Washington's nose and show that they were a real independent country. So they're basically like saying, okay, if we go 1/10 of the way, and then we'll go 1/10 of the way and just take a breather. And the thing is, if you're an American Caesar, you're right, you can't do that. You have to basically say, there was this great line, tweet of a friend of ours, saying that Trump should actually declare himself the living Constitution, right? And Caesar was certainly the living Constitution.
Yeah.
and the whole notion of the living Constitution, that's not our idea. It was their idea. And so the thing is that until you have, the point in a way is that obviously nothing like that can happen anytime soon, because you don't have an understanding of why that level of change is the only possible.
Leaving aside the extent
level
to which I naturally abhor and renounce any such suggestion of such things. Do you really believe, because I think I don't, that would work? My own sense is the system is still strong enough that if somebody tried to do that, the antibodies in the system would reject. It's going to need to get weaker.
The thing is that the easiest way to smash it is actually in one step. Let me tell you that basically what happens sort of concretely after this one step, you basically have this enormous upper class of the official class, the PMC, as our leftist friends call it, the ruling class. And the
PMC stands for what? Professional managerial class?
Yeah, something like that.
Okay.
They're in charge, so let's use their terms. The upper class. And this class has these institutions that it's focused around, that it sort of knows how to act through. And these institutions are enormously prestigious. These jobs are very difficult to get. Anyone who gets a job at the Times is a superstar. and will always be treated as a celebrity by everyone around them, all their friends at parties or whatever. It's a big deal. It's like becoming, it's like the cursus honorum of Rome. This cursus honorum, the path of honor, the path that people took to get into the leadership of the old Republican aristocracy, or for that matter, the imperial aristocracy.
By the way, I just wanted this anecdote. I think is not an anecdote, but I think it's telling.
Please.
I remember when Jill Abramson, whom I've met a few times, was fired. I can't even remember why, but anyway, she was the executive editor of the New York Times, so one of the ultimate jobs in the world. And she ran afoul of them somehow for some reason and got fired. I don't know how many years ago. And in a profile about her, she revealed in this profile that she had two. This is a lady at least I would say 10 years older than I am, 15 years older than I am, and who was an executive editor of the New York Times. But she revealed that she had tattoos, 2 of them. What were they? One was an H for Harvard, and the other was in that Gothic script, identical, a T for the New York Times, the Times logo. She had a tattoo of Harvard and the New York Times. It does reinforce your point that these are the 2 most important institutions in America, and that somebody who has been through and was to both felt that they were so life defining. She had them inked onto her body.
The internet doesn't have an image of this tattoo.
Not that I recall. I recall her just saying that to the interviewer or something.
In a piece I'm writing, I call them the Department of Reality and the Department of Truth, and together they make up the Department of Reality, right? And so the thing is, the idea that you're going to be a Caesar and take power and operate with someone else's Department of Reality in operation is just manifestly absurd. Machiavelli could tell you right away that that's a stupid idea. And so, the point is that when Caesar crosses the Rubicon, he doesn't sort of kind of sit around on the Rubicon getting his feet wet, doing a little fishing, no, he marches straight across the Rubicon, and basically his it's like, I don't think he actually says Alia Jacta asked, or Freud doesn't think he actually said that. But it's a very concrete binary outcome. It's like launching a rocket.
Yes, but he's got a legion with him, and
he's got a legion with him, right?
Which American figure can count on the loyalty of an armed force to back up his march through?
You don't really need an armed force. What you need is basically, people always used to joke about Trumpian uses of the emergency broadcast system, and essentially, you need the maximum capacity to summon democratic power that you can find. And so you need to basically have 80 million cell phone numbers, and every one of those cell phone numbers, they need to be running an app, which is, let's say the Trump app. Yeah. And you're running the Trump app, and the Trump app, you give it notification privileges, and it says, to you, maybe the day after the inauguration, look, this or that agency is not following my instructions. So this app can give you personal directions. It's basically an app where you put yourself under the remote control of Trump himself.
So it's a sort of app to recreate Sons of Liberty style quote unquote protest.
But in a way that you're not LARPing, you're actually doing the things that that's the most effective in the modern world. And so you're basically saying, literally, you have a crowd in which each individual can be steered around with a joystick by Trump himself. Right. So that's these people, these are, of course, peaceful protesters, peaceful demonstrators, but, when
the opposing regime has all the cops and the justice system and everything, and they roust to these people and arrest them and so on, as they've been doing with
the thing is, you need zeal
over January 6th. How does this continue?
Because on January 6th, you had 20,000 people. If you had 2 million people, and their goal had been to basically, support the president if you had what the libs thought January 6th was.
Or say anything. I wonder how many. I did enjoy your piece
whatever.
On that point
I know. It's this is a disgraceful. I don't like to be this. I don't like to talk about this much, as I have to get too animated about it. But let's imagine, what that would have meant in a country like, say, Egypt.
Yeah.
What it would have meant in a country like, say, Egypt is, instead of 20,000 people in one place, you have 20 million across the whole country.
Yeah.
Okay. You have a complete human barricade around every federal building. You're basically, you're just and you're saying, support the lawful orders of this new lawful authority. And so, furthermore, basically, that Trump network doesn't just extend into civilians. Basically, obviously, there are police forces, there are police officers who are Trumpians. They might put on a special armband in the day. The thing is, people are always like, well, the cops and the soldiers are, pro-Trump. These people don't act as individuals. They follow orders. So essentially, you have to be willing to say, okay, when we have this regime change, we have a period of temporary uncertainty, which has to be resolved in an extremely peaceful way. What that means is basically a state of emergency in the White House. It means the president is basically taking direct control over all law enforcement authorities, a state of emergency in basically every state. You have not only are you federalizing the National Guard and turning it out under federal orders, but you have this resource in addition to the resource of your vast popular network. You're basically like Caesar, you're using sort of all of the force available to you. And that's what you have to do to basically
all this comes down to is you think that combination would be sufficient to overcome the power centers of the regime.
But what it's missing is essentially, everybody thinks that much milder efforts can somehow be effective.
Oh, I don't know how many people think that.
Oh, well, they implicitly think that.
Some people may be required by their institutional affiliations to profess that.
It's possible, but the thing is that we're not talking about anything that is sort of out of the picture of either American legal and political history or American,
that you will be disputed on that point. I mean, I know you believe you're correct, but lots of people will say, no. First of all, you are interpreting it wrong.
Michael, have I not pointed you to the Wikipedia page for the Wide Awakes? I'm sure I've done this. Lincoln's paramilitary militia. Amazing page. It's really like my favorite brain-breaking historical, page, because the idea that Abraham Lincoln had his own basically SA, or Proud Boys, or whatever you want to call them, has been completely airbrushed out of history. And so the thing is that everything that you do in something like this, it has to. The Estonians did this once, really inspiring use of, I think it was the Estonians, or maybe it was all the Baltics. They formed a human chain, basically the length of the Baltic states, which is a sort of beautiful way of demonstrating kind of mass willpower without. So it has to be like sort of flash mobs in the kind of beautiful European sense, and so like. What you're displaying is not, when you display this enormous mass of people, it shouldn't be sort of menacing in this, January 6th sense. It should have this joyous sense that you're actually winning and winning forever, and the world is being completely, remade. And, you're not going to have any of this cold civil war shit. You're not going to have any of this race shit. Nobody's going to care about race. The whole thing is falling down. And that is that's the feeling of these kinds of post-Soviet revolutions. It's just like, the mandate of the system has completely expired. And, if the Politburo orders the KGB troops to attack the crowds in front of President Yeltsin's palace, nothing's going to happen.
But you don't think we're at that point?
No, we're not at that point. But the thing is, that's the point that you have to pass through.
Okay. So last question then, because I think we're coming up on 2 hours.